Maybe you've heard that politics is downstream of culture. Well, that's not true in an abstract sense. I'm gonna give you 10 examples where a TV episode directly led to a law being changed or a massive cultural shift. And you know this if you think about it for a moment. Why do we have maturity ratings for movies? Because we know there would be harm done to kids and their minds and their perceptions if they saw 50 Shades of Grey when they were 7. But even aside from sex and violence, most of us, even if it's perfectly appropriate otherwise, would object to Birth of a Nation, the movie that glorifies the KKK, to be shown maybe anywhere, but at least to young school children. In Hollywood in the 1930s through 50s, there was something called the Hays Code, which illegally forbade movies from having certain types of sexual or violent content. It's no coincidence that just as the Hays Code ended and movies started bringing in more subversion, sex, and violence, did we get the countercultural movement of the 1960s. And then the comedians of the 1970s who challenged the 7 dirty words you can't say on television. Furthermore, lawmakers live in culture as much as you or I, and that affects how they interpret the laws. For example, 1973's decision Roe v. Wade, or the Plessy v. Ferguson decision that legitimized segregation. Well, those Supreme Court cases would have been unimaginable if they were decided in each other's time, even with the same constitution and the same laws on the books. Take an obvious example, Obergefell v. Hodges, which legalized same-sex marriage across the United States, was based on the 14th Amendment, which was passed in the 1860s, and the Supreme Court case Loving v. Virginia from 1967. But I think we all know, even the most liberal of jurists wouldn't have made that Obergefell decision in prior years, even though the substance of the decision, the 14th Amendment and Loving v. Virginia, had been around for decades by that point. The Constitution is nothing without enforcement, and what we enforce is going to be based on our cultural values, which in turn are often shaped by media. The late Justice Antonin Scalia once asked a graduating class of law students what protected their rights in America. Well, one of them responded, "The Bill of Rights, sir." Scalia went off. He said, "Oh, really? So that means everyone is protected in North Korea and Cuba and Syria and Iran and China, right? Because they all have a Bill of Rights, don't they?" And I just imagine the students are like, "Sir, this is a Wendy's. Put the fries in the bag. Dubai chocolate." Oh, man. The point is, we are a bunch of people who do things, and there are guidelines to do things, but we can disregard guidelines, and we often do, or at least radically reinterpret what they mean based on our present set of values. And what we accept culturally will, in short order, be accepted legally. This is even true in dictatorships. Remember, Francisco's Spain was originally an autarky that limited trade with the rest of the world, but there was a much discontent among the populace that Franco opened up to trade and created what was called the Spanish Miracle. So now that we all agree about the potency of public opinion in theory, let's take a look at 10 direct examples where a TV show changed society permanently. So this is one of the most famous examples, but as recently as 2012, no major Democrat, let alone Republican, in the entire country would advocate gay marriage.
I think New York State should recognize gay marriage.
No.
No. Okay.
Now it's difficult to find a Republican who wouldn't.
I think I've been convinced.
Here's Obama and Biden running for president.
I believe that marriage is the union between a man and a woman. Now, for me as a Christian...
Do you support gay marriage?
No.
And to really demonstrate how potent public opinion is this striking fact. There are 195 countries in the world. Do you know how many countries in the year 2000 had gay marriage? 0. And then with 0 major constitutional changes in any of these countries, 39 do now, including 100% of Western countries who pride themselves on their constitutionality. Well, isn't that interesting? The same constitution in all these countries in 1980 was read to mean no gay marriage, and then that same constitution today is read to allow gay marriage. Well, doesn't that just demonstrate the potency of culture and public opinion, no matter what constitutions we say make our laws? At bottom, it's what we think should be done. Right? The Constitution only even matters if we have a cultural value of listening to the Constitution. So therefore, if we have a value for gay marriage that's above the Constitution or anything else, we're going to make that the law. Okay, so if we understand cultural attitudes as the formal cause, what was the efficient cause that actually changed public opinion? Well, for gay marriage, it was 2 TV shows, specifically, that literally changed the legal regime in this country. The more important of the 2 is Will and Grace. Will and Grace was a popular NBC sitcom that ran from 1998 to 2006, before later being revived in 2017. It was about a gay lawyer named Will Truman and his best friends, a woman named Grace Adler and another gay man, Jack McFarland. It was viewed every night for 7 years by an average of 13 million viewers. McCormick portrayed Will Truman as a nice, normal guy. In fact, the show received criticism in the beginning for not making him seem more gay, and that they were trying to straightify him to make him more palatable to the American audience. But as the lead of the show, Eric McCormick, points out, that was the most subversive thing they could do, because they portrayed a gay man as essentially normal and looking for a long-term monogamous relationship, also known as marriage, which prompted the audience to be accepting of gay marriage, because it was seen as so normal.
There was a lot of criticism early on about my character, that perhaps he wasn't gay enough, that he was neutered or safe for America, but we were saying today that the idea that instead of running around and sleeping with a lot of guys, that he was actually just looking for one man to love, turns out is a much more dangerous idea to Americans and much more subversive than we realized.
A 2018 Journal of Popular Culture article argued that Will and Grace played a key role in mainstreaming gay identity by presenting gay characters as integral to everyday life, not as marginalized or tragic figures. And then, what do you know? When the show premiered, 27% of Americans supported gay marriage, and then 2 years after the show ended, it was up to almost 40%, which created a snowball that led to the percentage becoming 60% the year Obergefell v. Hodges, which legalized gay marriage in every state, was decided. To demonstrate how impactful and how much the show moved the football down the field, is that as recently as 2003, homosexuality was illegal. That means states had laws that punished homosexual acts done in private with jail. So in 12 years, we went from gay activity being illegal at home to gay marriage being legal across the whole country. That public opinion shift doesn't just happen because people are in their rooms thinking about gay people and if they should marry or not. It comes from seeing Will Truman be a lovable gay guy every night in your TV. There was really no mainstream gay character on a sitcom besides like Jody on Soap before Will Truman. And after Will and Grace, networks felt comfortable and created shows like Queer as Folk and Glee, which specifically had an episode where Blaine called for marriage equality.
I thought maybe you could wear it at work to show your support for gay marriage.
And most notably, perhaps, Modern Family. But to finally emphasize the effect Will and Grace had on public policy, here's Joe Biden explaining how it, more than anything else in the country, changed attitudes. And he's kind of implicating himself, too, because he says this after a 40-year career in Congress, where time and again he voted against gay marriage, gays in the military, gays being out of the closet, so he may as well be speaking for himself here.
When things really begin to change is when the social culture changes. I think Will and Grace probably did more to educate the American public than almost anything anybody's ever done.
I started to cry. I mean, I think it was like the proudest moment of my life besides the birth of my son.
And it did all this while never explicitly calling for gay marriage. Its successor show, Modern Family, did. Modern Family took the torch from Will and Grace and extended it further, explicitly having an episode where same-sex marriage is legalized in California, and two of the characters get married. A study by The Hollywood Reporter found that 27% of viewers reported viewing same-sex marriages favorably at higher rates because they watched the show. And remember, Obergefell v. Hodges was decided by a 5-4 decision, and in his decision, Justice Kennedy even acknowledged the shift in public sentiment as crucial. So he's literally saying Obergefell, the legalizing gay marriage decision, was because of a change in public opinion, and Will and Grace and Modern Family created that change in public opinion. Specifically, Justice Kennedy mentioned change understandings of marriage and public acceptance were key to his ruling. So he's even saying it. I don't even have to make this video. In fact, the 2014 season finale of Modern Family showed the two gay characters getting married was the exact year before Obergefell was decided. Modern Family was so successful in changing public opinion because of its Trojan horse approach. Just like Will Truman was portrayed as a normal guy, so he seemed normal, and then so you get to like him, and then you're fine with his sexuality by proxy. Modern Family was a goofy show about a bunch of different families, and one of them, just one among many, was a gay one, and it was normalized like the others. Normalization was the greatest weapon. Remember, Will Truman was criticized for being too stereotypically straight, but if he had come out as like a, Liberace character, people would have been less accepting, and because at least they would have viewed him as less normal. Modern Family also had such a strong effect because it got 12 million viewers every night, so it was able to spread across so many different demographics the normalization of a gay marriage, not even just a gay relationship. And then finally, the writer of the show was a gay man who intentionally wrote these stories to reflect and promote what he viewed as progress in gay acceptance. In 2014, GLAAD reported that 59% of Americans felt TV portrayals of gay characters increased their comfort with LGBTQ issues. So I will go so far as to say that if I had to take a bet, knowing the Obergefell decision was decided 5-4, and that only a few years earlier, practically every state that had a referendum on allowing gay marriage lost. Even liberal 2008 California voted to ban gay marriage in its constitution in 2008. So I would bet that if Will and Grace and Modern Family, and then its attendant shows like Queer as Folk and Glee never existed, Obergefell would not have been decided. And as I write this, I just found out that the Supreme Court is about to decide if they're going to take up a case that could overrule Obergefell, a noted goal of Justice Clarence Thomas. So, if anyone wants to change their decision, I would recommend making Will and Grace 2. Bill and Mace. I don't know.
Then there's Maude. And then there's Maude.
A couple years before Roe v. Wade was decided, I want to ask you, how many states do you think had elective abortion legal? If we imagine 25 conservative, 25 liberal states, you might guess 25. Or maybe because it was the 70s, only 20? The answer is 0. Not even California or New York. The range of abortion policies went from illegal in all cases to illegal in all cases except rape and incest or the life of the mother. And in the next couple years when Roe v. Wade was decided, still, only 4 states had any elective abortion laws at all. So when Roe v. Wade was decided, it overturned the laws of 46 out of 50 states. It was a radical decision, one that JFK's Supreme Court appointee Byron Wright called an exercise of raw judicial power. And I think we can all agree, no court in American history would have decided that before the Warren Court, even though every other court was working with the same constitution. That leaves only a change in cultural values as the deciding factor. Enter Maude. Maude Finlay is this outspoken, middle-aged, progressive feminist who's the cousin of Edith Bunker from another politically progressive show, All in the Family. And 20 million people across CBS's nearly 200 affiliates watched Maude, for the first time anywhere in television history, get an abortion with the support of her first husband. And guess what? Just like Justice Anthony mentioned in the Obergefell decision, Harry Blackmun's majority opinion in Roe v. Wade noted societal context and shifting values that caused the decision. Also in parallel with Modern Family, the creator of Maude, Norman Lear, was an outspoken progressive on abortion who wanted to make it into a national conversation. And it worked. 70% of respondents to a survey found the episode thought-provoking, with many saying it made them reconsider their views on abortion. Abortion was also negatively viewed as a very reckless act back then, so by demonstrating Maude as an independent, self-sufficient woman, it changed the conversation and made abortion viewed more positively. Even today, I've never really understood this position, but there are people who say, oh, it's okay to get an abortion if you're the birth control failed once and you're normally responsible, but if you're using it for birth control and it's your 8th one because you're just irresponsible, that's not okay. And this attitude has really fixated in our culture. Like this author talking about her time with poor kids in the city who she viewed as irresponsible, in this case for not getting an abortion.
Most mothers tell us that they decided that the responsible way to deal with a pregnancy, even an unplanned pregnancy, is to carry that child. Now, this is one of the most interesting things from a middle-class point of view, because for a middle-class girl growing up on Philadelphia's main line, who got pregnant by accident at 16 or 17, as these young women did, the responsible thing to do would probably be not to carry that child to term.
So Maude started the shift where abortion was seen as okay if you were a responsible person, maybe even advisable if you were a responsible person, but not if you're irresponsible. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously said that the abortion case of Roe v. Wade was partially made because there were some populations that the U.S. didn't want to have too many of. A lot of let's say, classist or racist interpretations there. And then, the year after Maude had an abortion, Roe v. Wade overturned 46 states' abortion laws and legalized it nationwide.
Where everybody knows your name.
In the 1980s, about 20,000 people died from drunk driving every year, compared to today, when the U.S. has added 100 million to its population and only 12,000 die a year. An organization called Mothers Against Drunk Driving had started to raise awareness of the problem, but it didn't work. Enter Jay Winston, a Harvard communications professor. When a local newscaster in Boston was killed by a drunk driver in 1985, Jay was so moved that he wanted to find out how he could reduce this problem and save lives. He heard drunk driving deaths were lower in Sweden and Norway, my native land, so he went to Sweden and Norway. I don't know why he didn't just Google it. Ask AI. But he went to Sweden and he found they had a term called ansvarig förare, which means responsible driver. To make it catchy, he came up with the alliterative term designated driver, and wanted to figure out a way to popularize it in America. Well, don't let anyone tell you media studies degrees are worthless, because he met with 250 TV executives on how to spread this message of the designated driver. He immediately ruled out a PSA because those were seen as preachy and uncool. Let me ask you, when was the last time you quit Juuling because of those Nickelodeon ads that was like a hole in my small intestine because of a Juul, and that made me want to take up a life of breathing air? But Jay Winston was smart. He got all the major TV shows at the time to start using the term casually. The Cosby Show,
Be the designated driver.
LA Law, Cheers,
He's our designated driver.
and later Friends started saying designated driver. In 1988, no one had heard of this term. By 1991, 90% of Americans had. You know, that's one benefit of monoculture for sure. 8 years after the campaign launched, annual drunk driving deaths went down from 24,000 to 16,000. By 1991, dictionaries were using it, presidents were talking about it.
Choose a designated driver.
And today, more than 100,000 people are alive. And presumably even more for those people who went on to have children. All because of an episode of Cheers and Friends and The Cosby Show. Glad this guy did some good. Believe it or not, because it's such a well-known term, the friend zone literally just comes from one season 1 episode of Friends in 1994. And no one said it before then. You will find no TV show or quote or anything of anyone using the term before that 1994 episode. It happened in a funny moment where Joey tells Ross Rachel has him in the friend zone. And it was particularly memorable because Joey calls him the mayor of the zone.
Because you waited too long to make your move, and now you're in the friend zone.
No. I'm not in the zone.
Oh, Ross, you're mayor of the zone.
The film Pretty in Pink from the 80s had so many opportunities for this term because of Ducky's unrequited love for Andy, but of course they never say it. The term didn't exist. But then once Friends used it, New Girl, The Office, even MTV had a show called Friend Zone, and it was used everywhere.
I ain't as good as I once was.
I had to include this one even though it's a movie because it just blew my mind. Before 2007, there was no term the bucket list. No shows or movie or person ever said bucket list until the 2007 movie with Morgan Freeman and Jack Nicholson called The Bucket List, about two terminally ill old guys wanting to do a few cool things before they kick the bucket. I remember being 6 and my sister asking, like, what's on my bucket list, this cool teenage term. And I guess that was, 2010. It just feels like it's been around for so long. Before some, second-rate Morgan Freeman movie from 2007. No one's even heard of this movie anymore. But like 100% of people and their dog know the term bucket list. If you're not unk enough like me to remember the 1992 election, you won't remember the vice president, Dan Quayle, publicly coming out and condemning Murphy Brown, the popular sitcom about an eponymous news reporter, for having a storyline that glorified single motherhood.
It doesn't help matters when primetime TV has Murphy Brown, a character who supposedly epitomizes today's intelligent, highly paid professional woman, mocking the importance of fathers by bearing a child alone and calling it just another lifestyle choice.
The show even responded in its season 5 premiere, saying this:
Perhaps it's time for the vice president to expand his definition and recognize that whether by choice or circumstance, families come in all shapes and sizes, and ultimately, what really defines a family is commitment, caring, and love.
But what's undeniable is that the show did have an impact.
I doubt that my status as a single mother has contributed all that much to the breakdown of Western civilization.
Sorry, Candace, you're wrong. People do look to your show to decide what to do with their lives. Or at least it changes their opinion of what's okay, and downstream, it affects their life choices. While the show averaged about 18 million viewers, the one about single motherhood got almost 40 million. A 1993 Journal of Communication study found 45% of female viewers saw Murphy as a role model, and 20% reported greater acceptance of single-parent families because of the show. And at the public at large, approval for single motherhood rose from 43% to 50% from 1990 to 1992. In fact, in 1992, a survey found literally 60% of Americans knew about this controversy between the vice president and the lead of some TV show. And bad news for Dan Quayle, 60% sided with Murphy Brown. This is important because congressional hearings the next few years were held about welfare reform. Bill Clinton, along with the Republicans who made a contract with America, were seeking to reduce welfare programs and increase work requirements. A lot of ideas were floating around about how to do that, and a lot of Republican senators wanted to penalize single motherhood. But because of Murphy Brown's push for the acceptance of single motherhood, those ideas didn't get off the ground. And if you're like me, you'd be wondering, did they really entertain, taking away food stamps for single mothers? And the answer is yes. And it makes sense if you understand what the act was trying to do, which was explicitly to reduce the incidence of out-of-wedlock pregnancies, and encourage the formation and maintenance of two-parent families. That was explicitly the goal of the federal government. New Jersey had already taken away welfare for mothers who continued to have children, and then Republicans proposed making this the national policy. Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, proposed not giving benefits to unwed teen mothers. And this blew my mind because I could not even imagine someone proposing this today. And then this blew my mind because this wasn't a proposal, this was actual policy by liberal Democrat President Bill Clinton. States were paid money if they reduced their rates of women having children if they weren't married. States literally got $20 million if they lowered their rates of unmarried women having kids if they didn't have an attendant increase in the abortion rate. If their abortion rate went up, they didn't get the money. So like Alabama and the District of Columbia got $20 million from the government because they lowered their out-of-wedlock births without increasing abortion. This wasn't that long ago. This was the 90s. So you can imagine how much of a real possibility punishing single mothers in welfare was as a proposal. But largely thanks to Murphy Brown and the public opinion surrounding it, with 60% siding with Murphy Brown, and the viewership of tens of millions of people, therefore the 1996 welfare reform bill did not punish single mothers. So there are a lot of mothers on welfare today because of Murphy Brown. Oh, this is so sad. In 2019, the Journal of Adolescent Health did a study that found a 30% spike in suicides among 10 to 17-year-olds in April of 2017, the month after 13 Reasons Why came out. Some studies thankfully disputed that finding on the causes, but what's undeniable is that 40 more 10 to 17-year-olds killed themselves that month. Calls to the suicide prevention hotline went from 65,000 to 83,000. And researchers estimated that there were 195 more suicides between April 2017 and December 2017 than was expected based on historical trends. But 13 Reasons Why permanent effect on law comes from mental health organizations testifying about it to pass Bill AB 224, a California bill that mandated mental health education in schools, which led to a 15% increase in students seeking mental health support, and a similar law being passed in New York and Virginia. And a few days ago, building off of these laws, Illinois mandated that every kid, healthy or not, from 3rd grade on, is going to get a mandatory mental health test every year they're in school. And this is unimaginable without the precedent of these other state bills, which came from organizations testifying based on 13 Reasons Why. And I really think these laws are bad ideas. Already we saw in California and New York that suicide rates rose after implementation. California students reported an increase in anxiety. After these courses in New York, students had a spike in calling the suicide hotline. The Werther effect is well documented. That's the effect where exposure to suicide increases suicide rates, named for the novel by Goethe, The Sorrows of Young Werther, which is about young Werther killing himself. And there was a subsequent increase in suicides by people who read the book or people who had friends who read the book. So, very sad to say, but without 13 Reasons Why, would there be more people alive today? Would there be more kids alive today? Seems the answer is yes, at least people who were kids a few years ago. And are these misguided policies based off the show likely going to result in more kids dying? It also seems the answer is yes. I'm not a fan of this one. So I didn't realize this. I think we've all heard of Birth of a Nation, you know, like the racist KKK movie in the 1910s or whatever. But it, started the KKK. The first wave of the KKK, formed after the Civil War, had, 100,000 members at its peak, right? At its peak. But Birth of a Nation inspired the second KKK. See, the movie came out in 1915. The second KKK started in 1915, okay? The second KKK had, 8 million members. And everything we associate with the KKK comes from the second wave. And everything about the second wave comes from the movie Birth of a Nation. The burning crosses and the white cloaks and, that all came from the movie. The movie was based on a book. And the guy who wrote the book just came up with this burning cross stuff that would and the white cloaks that was not in the first KKK, and the movie popularized it and everyone started doing that. I watched the movie to prepare for this, and the movie features the Klan as these gallant knights on horseback, saving white women from the predations of black male sexual aggression. Above all, the movie portrays the Klan as something they weren't seen as the first time around. They're seen as noble. That's why so many people wanted to join. You know how movies are in theaters for a couple months? This movie was in theaters for 9 years. No one really liked the first KKK, okay? They were seen as like terrorists, vigilantes, they were lawless. No mainstream politician supported them, no matter how much of a racist Democrat they were. You know, maybe a local mayor, you know, your racist Mayor Bob, you know, in like a town of 100 people supported the KKK the first time around. But the second Klan, well, they were as brave people are brave. Like, you know, I think they were even partially inspired by the Knights of Malta, okay? Second Klan was lauded by national politicians, most notably Woodrow Wilson, of course, but also congressmen, and so many people joined because of its positive image, created not only by Birth of a Nation, but like exclusively by Birth of a Nation, and the power of the medium of film. And you know, think back to 1915, like there were no movies, like a movie with these giant moving pictures and everybody watching it, seeing these brave knights like save white women. You can imagine the effect that had, and it clearly had a massive effect. The whole KKK, as an entity, basically owes its existence to this movie. I'm not a fan of this one either. Finally, Roots. Okay, you guys know the concept of white guilt? You know, like being guilty for being white, or someone apologizing for being white.
I hate slavery so much. Slavery's the worst.
Rosanna Arquette once said, "I'm sorry I was born white and privileged. It disgusts me, and I feel so much shame." Oh boy. I know someone who went to a, like, woke high school where the professor was like, "I'm sorry I'm a white male, guys. Like, I'll try to be better." Well, that starts as a concept with the 1977 miniseries Roots, which follows the life story of Kunta Kinte, follows him being bought by slave traders in Africa and seeing the American Revolution, the Civil War, finally the emancipation of slaves, and it showed the brutal violence slaves suffered and humanized the slaves, right? They were the main characters. It caused a boom in African American studies. Hundreds of colleges added courses because of this show. Middle schools had assemblies about it, okay? Black people had a huge spike in interest in their genealogy, and it was literally watched. This statistic is crazy. It was literally watched by 85% of people. Like, 85% of households in America watched Roots. Its finale is literally the third most viewed TV episode ever made. What I found striking was there were a number of viewers, particularly white women, no shock there, who came away from the experience saying they felt shame and guilt being white. A few decades later, of course, there was infamously a study that found white liberals are the only group that has a preference against themselves, so they'd rather hang out with anybody who's not them. This all starts with Roots. Like, before Roots, among the most liberal of activists, you'll never hear someone apologize for being white. But then Roots aired, and people at the time noted it caused soul-searching for white people. One analysis of viewer letters from the era describes Roots as the occasion for an expression of white guilt. One white viewer recalled it as her first lesson in slavery and racism. Some viewers, for the first time, felt bad for being white. A Unitarian Universalist report looking at white guilt noted his own personal shift in the late 1970s from what he called denial to guilt and helplessness. You know, which is another way of saying he didn't feel white guilt and then he did. In fact, the first, like, what would be called, you know, woke anti-racism book called White Awareness Handbook for Anti-Racism Training came out in 1978, the year after Roots. So Birth of a Nation birthed racism and Roots birthed anti-racism. Media is a potent tool. What we use it for, racism or anti-racism, it's up to us. Making this episode really was enlightening to me to see how impactful media can be. On a personal level, I've received so many comments about how impactful, you know, these episodes have been, maybe talking about our deep-seated expectations from Nickelodeon shows, how that's caused so much suffering for a lot of us in what we thought our life needed to be. I'm so moved by that, and I'm so glad to hear the impact this is having in some of your lives. I know I've definitely been impacted by what we talk about here. What do you think about these examples? I was struck by how the bucket list was invented by the bucket list, also how 13 Reasons Why caused so many kids to kill themselves. I just feel so bad for anyone who lost their life. Who wouldn't have if it wasn't for 13 Reasons Why. Also, if these videos have moved you, I'd love if you could join us on Patreon. We have a little after party after these videos, or we have a chat about them, and we're also just, I think, a thoughtful community. Shout out to our patrons, Bob Pflugfelder, Eric Guy, Natta, Matt Gillespie, Saba, and Keaton, our newest patron. Welcome, Keaton. Thank you for watching, and I'm looking forward to reading your comments.